Welcome to week 3 of spring drawing, because we all need to go outside some more. And if you look at my desk, you'll see that I have a whole bunch of supplies. Assembled. I'm sorry, my phone just rang. So let me go over what we did last week and what we're going to do next week. And I will also go over what we're doing today. So as usual, if you want to sort of participate in the class life, Fanny can text out this code, but you go to classroom.google.com and you can sign yourself up with this code as a student in my class. You can submit your drawings for brief review, and you can also see all sorts of things I've done before, recordings, drawings that I've uploaded, suggestions, things that I've referred to during lecture, and stuff like that. It's getting to be a pretty rich reservoir of information there. And then this week is supposed to be pen and ink drawing with watercolor or pencil washes or marker washes, essentially, which is very much sort of an outgrowth of what we did last week with the drawings of the flowers and the lavender, where we essentially created a coloring book and then filled in the color. So this is a little bit more about that technique, which is one of my favorite techniques. So last week we talked about shading and line language, and I did a little demo on shading. You can see the lecture. It's linked through my Google Classroom and through the Palo Alto Art Center Foundation, and the previous week as well. Previous week was pretty much just sort of intro to drawing and line and sort of some very basic how to draw ideas and things. Last week we focused a little bit more on how to draw accurately and how to shade things, just very basic intro to shading. Something we'll do a little bit today is some color mixing. I don't know if that's a little too elementary, but it's always fun and I always love doing it. So we'll do a little bit of color wheeling, and then we'll do some drawing and essentially how to make a coloring book things. So I thought I might show you some drawings I've done in the past that use this technique, so you can kind of see what you can do with it. And then we will begin with actual instruction. So something I'm going to do today, these sort of illustrate what I'd like to do today. So let me bring them into view. This one, I put down a whole bunch of paint washes, and then I thought of what drawing to put on top of the paint washes. This was a prompt from last year's, I think it was Inktober, that was set up by a wonderful person named Lisa Congdon, who's a brilliant illustrator and art educator up in Portland. So this was for Inktober, and the prompt for the day was faces. So I just made ink blotches, and then I drew the faces on top of them. It's a little bit cartoony, but I really enjoyed the exercise. This one is kind of neat. I drew sort of made up eyes. So they're kind of cartoon eyes, but then I dropped watercolor paint into them, which kind of made for an interesting effect. So I'm going to do a little bit of both of these, where we draw blotches and then draw on top, and where we do the drawing and then add some color to it to make it more interesting, or just to essentially do a fairly realistic drawing. So let me put those over here. I have a couple more that are sort of just sweet to show. This one seems pretty apropos. I see these California poppies blooming around. Since it was Inktober, I had done a whole series of voting postcards. But these essentially were pencil drawings, and then ink drawings put on the pencil, and then watercolor washes layered over the top. And then I did this one. And this one is kind of neat. It's very small. Let me see. If I hold it still, it should come into focus. Very small. And I made it up thinking about things that I love out in the redwood forest: bewick's wrens, shelf fungus, salamanders, and mushrooms and ferns. And it's done with gel pen, so it has a little shimmer to it. So it's not a watercolor wash painting. It's essentially a coloring book. It's pen and ink and then color on top. And not very much color, just a little. All right. So something we may get to today is I have these two essentially unfinished drawings. And one is an ink sketch I did behind Golden Gate Park with no paint on it. And one is a painting I did down in Big Sur some beautiful evening with no ink on it. I'm not sure I want to paint on this one anymore. I kind of love it the way it is. Just so plain and simple. It seems rather pure. I don't know. I'm not sure it needs anything else, but we may get there as well. So something I will often do is either do the drawing or the painting and add ink or watercolor as appropriate. So this one I'm much more interested in just painting it in and having it become a painting. So maybe we'll get to that, but I would prefer to paint from life. Here's my Yoda words of wisdom. Paint from life, you should. You should. Painting from life has this wonderful ability to teach you how things actually are. And painting from previously done sketches or painting from photographs, you're not doing quite the same work. So now I'm clearing off my desk so that I can start to paint. Here's the please remember to record card. Oh, there's this one hiding under here. This is another of those series I did in October. And these were all responses to these wonderful prompts. So I have some watercolor paper here, but it is perfectly possible to do this whole lesson with just printer paper, whatever paper you have. When people ask my husband how he bicycles so well, he says it's the engine, it's not the bike. So you can make art with absolutely anything. And I wouldn't be worried about whether you have this or that art supply. I've actually tried to really simplify my art supplies for you so that everybody feels included no matter what they have. So a pencil, a pen. There's something important about these two pens, so I'm going to go into that in a minute. And then I also have colored pencils that don't become watercolor, and I have colored pencils that do become watercolor, and then I also have just a kid's watercolor kit, which I must confess is not what I usually use. I have a very fancy watercolor kit. Just as a point of note, the difference between expensive art supplies and cheap art supplies, especially in terms of paint, is the amount of pigment in the paint. So here you can see what colors they are right here in this kit. But if you're using a very fancy, expensive watercolor kit, the colors will be so pure that you won't be able to see, and you'll have to add some water to see whether it's purple or red, because it will be such intense pigment. So when you're like, why is this box of paint $6 and this box of paint $100? That's because the $100 box has a lot more actual paint and less chalk, filler, gum, Arabic, whatever it is they throw in the paint to dilute it in it. Let's see. I think we should just begin. So step one, if you want to draw along, you can. If you want to just treat this as sort of visual note-taking and just learn as you go and then do the exercises after the class, that's also very fine. Something I often do when following along with a webinar is I sort of half do what the teacher is doing and otherwise just watch and learn. I'm providing these classes in a very content-rich format. So they are not very slow, and it might be hard to keep up if you don't have your setup already all set up before you arrive in class and before, just if you don't have something to paint or if you don't have the supplies you want or you don't have good light or whatever it is. So you can also just listen and take some notes. All of the material presented will be recorded here. And also anything I create, I will put in a slideshow in the Google Classroom. And you can also send me comments through Google Classroom and I will respond. I don't have a next minute response time because I'm not the sort of person who's always staring at my phone. Let's see. Let's begin because sort of step one for today, since we're going to do essentially these two techniques, one where you put down blotches of paint and one where you do a drawing and fill it in. Something that we have to do first is make blotches of paint because they have to dry while we do this exercise. And then we'll switch back once they're dry in a few minutes to put drawings on top of paint blotches. So what we're going to start with is some paint blotches. And I actually think I'm going to look at my samples. I have some very pretty samples from big wide world here. Especially like, I love this one. It's so gorgeous. And I'm gonna make a paint blotch that has something to do with what that looks like. Something you have to do to get watercolor started is to just add a whole bunch of water to the colors you're using. So I just drop a bunch of water in here. And then it becomes paint if I'm just patient with it. It will just start becoming paint. This is much different. Let me demonstrate how not to do it. So how not to do it is to get a little drop of water on your paintbrush. You guys can't really see this, but there's a water bin right here. And scrub at a dry pan like this. It hurts your brush and it doesn't work very well. And I splattered paint everywhere. So what I'm suggesting is that you just don't do that, that you just let the paint sit for a sec. It'll become liquid. I'll also demonstrate how to do this with just the pencils. So paint blotches. Maybe this one. And this purple one is so pretty. Something you'll notice is that watercolor paint becomes liquid. And to make it light and dark, you add more or less liquid. If you use it fairly thick and straight, it's very dark. And if you add some liquid, it becomes much lighter. So just so you can see this, there we go, that's better. It's hard to see it on the tabletop, so there you go. So as I add more paint or more water, it becomes much lighter. And then if I drop paint in, it becomes much darker. See the difference? When you are looking at watercolor paintings, many of them are done almost completely with a very light level of pigment. You're like, wow, that painting is neat, but too pale. So the way to fix that is to just sort of saturate the paint with it, like that. And something that's kind of magical is if you saturate with something else, it gets even cooler. So here's a little bit of the method here. I want everything on the picture, which makes it very cluttered. I'm going to push those aside so you can actually see what I'm doing. Everybody still with me? Okay. So what I'm going to start with is just making a wash that's sort of in the shape of this pretty flower. And I'm not going to be very particular about it. And I'm adding some water because I don't want it all to be really dark. But it does seem to me like the middle is really quite dark. So right here, where these really neat rays come out, I'm going to do that. And just keep sort of dropping a little bit of water in there. And then maybe even some super dark in the middle. See how the paint pushes out the watercolor away? This is why people get addicted to watercolor, because it does so many beautiful things. It's really nice. And then we need some leaves. And again, you can drop in other colors. This is called wet and wet glazing, where you sort of let the paint flow free and decide for itself what it wants. And I'm using it fairly pure. If I want to dilute it, I use another little mixing container like this, the lid of the box or a plate. I find a white plate works best. So look what happens when I bring this green to meet this purple and they meet. It starts to create what's called a bleed. And a lot of watercolor painting is very fun because it bleeds into each other. But you should also be a little aware of where you want it and where you don't want it. So I'm not doing a very realistic drawing of this. I find that the realism is super useful when I'm drawing with just the pen and ink, and then I drop the color on top. But in this case, I'm kind of doing the opposite technique of sort of making a fairly impressionist painting. And then I'm going to come in and put pen and ink on top later. That makes sense? So then all of this will just dry over the course of the next 15, 20 minutes. 15 minutes, I hope, 10 minutes. And then we'll come back and revisit it. As always, if you super saturate your watercolors, you're going to get a livelier painting. And by that I mean super saturating just means drop more pigment into your wet washes. But the only way this works is if you don't add an opposite color. So say I were to add an orange, I get a very muddy result. Or if I were to add this sort of orangey red, it turns it brown, right? Because it auto mixes. All right. Any questions about that? Or maybe just for the fun of it, I'll just make it another blotch so we can do that one as well. Just trying to find what I can use. Let's see, I'm trying to think of what I should be blotching. I have another flower here. Maybe this one. These ones wilt really fast when I bring them in, but they're so beautiful. So let me do another blotch just of that one. So as a kid, I took a whole bunch of Sumier brush painting classes from Mrs. Izuke. And they convened every Saturday morning at the Palo Alto Junior Museum. And I was in them for about 6 years, which is the kind of thing. I had a geeky misspent childhood. What can I say? But it really taught me a lot about sort of the value of this sort of gestural brushstroke that I'm doing right now. And I always tell my oil painting and acrylic students that the brush you have doesn't matter. Good brushes are nice, but I tend to ruin them, so I don't really own them very much. But with watercolor, it's actually worth it to own a good brush. And there are many, many levels of brushes. Brushes can cost 50 cents and brushes can cost $100. You just have to decide where you want to be. But just like with the paint, at least for watercolor, it's one place you may want to consider having a good brush. One great way to get a good brush that is really nice and lovely and can cost 10 bucks is Sumier brush paintings. Brushes are very high quality, but also sometimes inexpensive. So there's a little, that's that pit. But there's something else about this flower that I haven't even painted yet. And that's these beautiful ones that are actually blooming out here. So I'm changing the color of it just so you can see it clearly. So when you say, oh, it's not that orange, yeah, it isn't. But I'm also just trying to make it so you can see. One of the interesting things about painting is that you are the only person who will know that that flower wasn't that orange. Unless you're doing science illustration, you can change whatever you want. And then just for fun, I'm going to put a leaf or two in. So these are all just blot drawings, and I'm not super concerned that they are or not correct. And I'm saturating the colors so that you can see them clearly. And something that's really lovely about watercolor is just letting the paint go where it pleases and bleed into each other and make beautiful patterns. And even this, you know, this is a $5 or $6 watercolor kit for kids. It doesn't matter. It can be really, really beautiful as long as you keep saturating the paint. The paint will dry a little bit lighter than you see it here. Wet paint is just like a stone from a river. You pick it up while it's wet and it's the most beautiful green, and then it dries and it's a gray stone. So it's the same effect. Let me just move this aside and we will switch to sort of, this is the first part of one drawing, and we'll switch over to the other drawing while this dries. Let me get my piece of paper. Wow. Okay. I think at the last minute, somebody cleaned off my desk. So, here we go. A drawing. So I'm going to draw in a slightly darker pencil than you need to, simply so you can see the drawing, not for any other reason. You guys can see that pretty well. All right. So let me draw this the way I might draw it to do a sort of a more finished drawing. And I'm going to arrange it. And then unlike you, at your end, I'm going to draw it as you see it rather than as I see it. Because if I put it the way I see it, it would come out like this, but then you wouldn't see what I was drawing. So I'm just going to draw from my screen. So I'm going to look intently at my face screen while I do this, which is a little weird. So like with the last week, we talked about sort of accuracy and planning. So here's, I want the drawing to fill sort of this space to this space, and maybe this space to this space. So I've just sort of set the outer parameters of my drawing. Here, 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 and here. And already my gesture sketch is in the wrong place. So I move it up. And then I have a leaf and a stem and another leaf. And there you go, a gesture sketch. And then just to like move this along a whole bunch faster, I am going to just pick up a pen and start doing like the contour section of this picture. So let's see, let's draw some things where they actually are. Can you see that line? Do I need to use a heavier pen? Okay, here we go. There's this beautiful little, it's actually a little structure that is both stamen and pistil of this plant. And then I'm just going to use my gesture sketch to guide my line. Something that's really beautiful about this plant is this little space between the petals. It's one of my favorite things about this one. Notice that the petals are foreshortened, so I don't draw each petal shaped like this. I draw each petal as I see it, which in this case, it looks kind of like that. And then I have one more petal over here. There we go. And then we'll do this. And then you can see its beautiful stem right here. And again, we talked about this last week, and I did a whole bunch of ideas and guidelines for how to make this kind of thing more accurate. So there's a negative shape here you can draw. And then there's another leaf here and one here. And this one is a really special leaf because you can really see the veining and the shape of the leaf right here. So I want to put that in. And then I'm going to draw that and this. And then it kind of. So something that I wanted to re-emphasize, I think I talked about this last week, is there are sort of two ways to draw a line. And I think this is just too small. So I'm going to switch. Switch over a little bit here. And I'm going to do this right here so you can see it. So see where I'm drawing the stem? I'm drawing it like this with big, long lines. So I find that people often, when they're beginning to draw, they make their lines more like this, where they're trying to resolve each bit of the line as they go along. And it makes for a very scratchy look. So if you're trying to draw a very confident line, you could draw this, kind of the shape of a petal, or you can draw this. But you'll see that a lot of your confidence is taken away by that sort of scratchy finding line. Whereas this looks much more like what we're looking at here. Does that make sense? There we go. And then we have, let's see, this one. And this one. So I really, because my laptop is pretty far away from me and I'm drawing from its screen, it's actually quite hard for me to see. So I'm sorry if things are not precisely as they actually are. So then we have that. There's another leaf back here. And you can use your lines in front, lines behind skills to show that it is behind. So one way to do that is to emphasize the lines in front, like that. So something I should demonstrate to you is this pen that I'm using I'm using it because it has a wide tip, but it has a drawback. It has a really big drawback, and I'm going to demonstrate that for you right now. So these micron pens and Sharpies are waterproof. So I add water and it doesn't stir up very much. I think if I also did it and let it dry for longer, it would really not stir up at all because I've used them for years. However, this one is essentially watercolor paint in a black holder. So when you use, you have to check your pens when you're using this technique to make sure that if you have a water soluble pen, you're going to use that element and not just be angry that it's water soluble and your painting is wrecked. So if you watch me here, where I made the water soluble lines, I have to just be happy that they're water soluble. Can't fix it. I mean, something I can do is drop in a little bit more paint and make it green, but I can't change the fact that it has black ink on it that's going to come up with the watercolor. That's fine. There are very beautiful ways to use the watercolor, kind of accidentally watercolor pen. A lot of people use it as a shading tool. So you'll see this in like model drawings and things like that. Where people just bring a water soluble pen and just use it as part of the paint, which I think is very fun. I really like it. So let's see, kind of step after you've done your sort of, are my drawings right? Then you can like perform your magic trick and erase all the pencil lines. And you'll notice that there's an awful lot of kind of the painting just becomes simpler and sort of happier, easier to deal with. Notice I can't erase where the wet paint is. If I erase over the wet paint will just go everywhere. You can see that there's already a little bit. Then I have to take the painting away and sort of make it stop having eraser all over it. Wow, I'm making a mess. Here. Let's see if we can fix it. So usually I use a much lighter pencil, very lightly, so that I don't have this problem where I have to really, really, really erase. Okay, let's do that. So then your next step, now that you've got your pencil done, something I think I might do is take some white out to this picture. Is something that's really fun to do with watercolor. Let me just demonstrate this. Is fill in a big shape. So this is the water soluble pen. And then drop the color into it and let the color find its own way. And it'll just disperse through your clear wash. And if you use another color, you kind of get this beautiful, lively effect. So notice I'm mixing two greens and not something else. Something I often do is find that I have to edit my drawings later. So I drew this leaf a little bit weird. I'm going to draw it better. Let me bring it back into view. There we go. Shouldn't have moved it. Okay. You can do that, but you can also just paint without a lot of ceremony or worry. I think a lot of people think about watercolor paint as being very demanding, but I find that if you are more accepting of it, it becomes sort of less traumatic and more fun. That a lot of it is simply accepting that it's going to go crazy and haywire, and that is part of it. Let's see. You guys hear me? Is the sound good and all that? Okay. I think I'm going to add a little bit of blue and see if I can just make this more fun. And the blue mixes in and it becomes more green. And then the stems need to be blue or green, except down here where they kind of become wood. It starts being a woody stem. I add a little bit of brown or orange. All right, now for the fun part. Let's get all the way up to the flower. And for this one, I kind of want that pretty purple, but diluted. So then I bring it into view. I go over here and add some water. But see how clean it is? Look what happens when I mix it with the green. It becomes brown. So keeping your paint separate, dabbing your brush out on your paper towel, all those things are quite useful. Let's see, something very light here, something very light here, maybe a little bit darker, something like here. Watercolor is done in lots of layers. So something you have to do is now let all of this just be for a little bit, unless you want to live on the wild side and try to do it as a wet and wet wash like this. And maybe that looks pretty too. I generally sort of mind my manners with watercolor. It's wild enough as it is. But I think I would probably have to let that dry for a bit before I add another pass to it. Any questions? I'm going to take that one away for a moment. Let's see if this one is dry yet. So here's the little wet and wet washes I had before. And when I touch them, they're still a little bit wet. So I'm going to put them aside again. And I will show you another technique. Maybe this would be useful. So something that I find really enjoyable to do is these sort of little imagination ones. But what I'm going to do is do a very simple little ink drawing of this cute flower, and then I will color it in with pen and ink, just or with my watercolor, or just with my colored pencils, just to keep things simple. So here's my little drawing. Oh, and because I am not using watercolor at this point, I can do it with my black pen. It'll be kind of nice, kind of easy to see. So here's my drawing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's not so bad. Pentagram flowers. This flower is in the same family as tomatoes. So notice that the line just sort of, I try to go from one place to another with the line all at one sort of rush. I always tell my students it's a little bit like reading fast, like with speed reading, where you try to see a big piece of what you're looking at and draw a big piece at one time. Okay. Watching people draw is actually pretty boring, so I'm going to stop. Here's this one. Essentially, this is much similar to what we did last week, where we made a little coloring book. Something that children love to do is take a line drawing like this and do the coloring in for you. And that can be quite a fun activity. So see, I put this leaf over that leaf, but I don't really care. It's going to work out okay. See, there's a really nice leaf right here. This one. Okay, so it's essentially a little coloring book. And since I'm not watercoloring it, I can just get on with things. Something that's, so these are just colored pencils. You can use anything. I think what matters is that you just use what you have. See, it's not as dark as the true value. So maybe I would find a marker, or maybe just this makes it really nice. Just another coating of the color. So notice I'm being a little bit more careful than I was last week. Last week I was very, very scribbly. But maybe I'm inspired by this cute little drawing to just do a little bit more, take a little more care with things. And by care, I mean just like, it's a coloring book, and essentially I'm just coloring in the lines that I invented. And trying to make my mark sort of even. Colored pencils, if you like using them and you're intrigued with this, colored pencils get their vibrancy not by you leaning hard on them, but by simply repeating the strokes over and over again until the paper is full. So they get that really bright, rich color just by having things go back over them. Something that will make it look more purple is to add some red. You have to be careful though that you add sort of a pinky red and not an orangey red, because an orangey red will just make it look brown. So this just makes it look more sort of more rich. Just like it's essentially the same process as using wet and wet watercolor. Just to like add other greens or other blues or other reds, what we call analogous colors, to kind of enliven and make it richer to look at. So see how that little whoopsie, it doesn't really matter for the painting. It looks fine with it. And again, if you want to just make it richer, you just go back over it with the pen some more, the pencil some more. There you go. And then it also is sort of a woody plant. So back here, it has, this part is actually fairly brown. I kind of made it too dark, so I'm going to add some yellow, hoping that lifts it up a little bit. These ones, the leaves are actually a really pretty yellow-green. So just like with the watercolor washes, I just drop a little bit of another color in, kind of make them more interesting. All right. Any questions? All right, here we go. Are people having trouble hearing me? All right. Let's see. So that's that. Let's go check on our little ink blotches, because I bet they're done by now.
And
so this
sorry
is,
to interrupt.
yeah.
Someone had a question about shading, if you were going to shade that drawing.
Oh, sure. I can shade it a little. I think to shade it, you would have to think about where the light's coming from. And I think I kind of like it just floating in space instead of putting all of its little shadows down. I think I like it as it is. But if you wanted to shade it so that it looked a little bit more 3D, see, the light's coming from above. So maybe you add a little bit here, a little bit here. This leaf would shade there, or does shade there. This leaf seems to be in more shadow.
Can you pull your drawing to the center of the screen?
How's that?
Lower, towards you more. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
And then anything else? So then I'm just adding a darker blue, and because it's already green, I haven't really corrupted its color all that much by adding that. That might be all I did for shading for this picture. Maybe the bottoms of these are a little darker. But really these drawings, in my mind, are more about like what the plant looks like. It's more of a botanical illustration than a painting. I forget its name. Sometimes this kind of flower is called blue witch. I forget this one's name. But this is pretty much just to demonstrate to you that if you don't have watercolors, you can use whatever you have. And you can just use markers. Sometimes I mix my media a lot. So here's a Sharpie. You can just use a Sharpie. So I tend to just wander off topic pretty easily with different media. Like maybe I like this bright red. Or I have these purple gel pens. I love these gel pens. Maybe they can add some dark accents. I wonder if you put little lines like that, if it would look cool. Maybe. So yeah, I love doing multimedia, and it's something I only discovered in the past few years. It's just really fun, and not really limiting myself to being dedicated to one media or another in one painting. There are some media you just cannot mix, but you know, water-based media you can mix pretty well. But things really do have to be dry if you want to put ink marks on top. So here's my trusty pen. Something you can do is if this water-soluble pen, which I keep enjoying drawing with, but being a little bit mad that it's water-soluble, you can use that as well. You just have to be careful that what's there is fairly dry. So here's my little sample. And we put it back in the middle of the picture. It's a beautiful little salvia in my garden. And what the pen will do essentially is just add all the details back in, kind of on top of the drawings. This is one of those pens that just, or one of those flowers that just doesn't stay fresh once you pick it. It's kind of gone. And I'm trying to actually sort of sneak around ahead of time here and do the drawing on something that isn't quite dry enough. Because the pen and ink just, you really can't put it on wet stuff. Let's see if there's something up here I can write. That's pretty good. Okay. So now I can go in here and be like, what is it really shaped like and what are the marks on it? Here's me being mixed media again.
And what brand of pens are you using?
The brand I love are these Micron 3. This is a Micron 3. The Microns are the waterproof ones. And then this is just a Papermate. It's called a Flare. This is the water-soluble one. And then the stuff that's just sort of around my desk, like gel pens. These are Jelly Roll pens. Those are nice. And then Sharpies. Essentially whatever is the answer to that. Let's see. I do love to use dip pens, but I don't want to demonstrate that in these classes because you probably don't have one, but I do like using them. Can draw with anything. This is an Energel paint pen, or this is just a desk pen, like a school pen. Let's see. So I did have this misspent youth as a plant geek, and it sort of shows when I draw flowers and things. I'm actually interested in their anatomy and what is there. So this one is mainly pollinated by hummingbirds. And this little thing right here is to make sure that whatever pollen is on the beak of the hummingbird is delivered to the plant. So it's actually there as a little trap, which I think is really cool. I watch my hummingbirds use it all the time. Works every time. These are so cute, all these little future flowers. All right, let's see if this will do it. Let's go back to this one, because this one is still not dry enough. I guess I put too much paint on it. This drawing needs a lot of work, and you can make suggestions if you want. But when I look at it, I see so many things I would like to see different. Like the leaf shapes are not very good. This is very pretty. And then I also want to see all the cool, beautiful lines in here. And this is what you can do by adding stuff on top. And I might just go back to brushing it on. Okay, shall we see what else we can do together? So I was hoping it would come out as nice as this, but I'm having trouble drying the paint quickly enough. So this is what I was hoping to get, and this is what I got, which is pretty sad. Let me show you another thing that I often do. So many pieces of paper. Here it is. So this is a drawing I did a long time ago. And I have a lot of these in my sketchbooks where I started something, but I didn't really finish it. So something that's fun to do when you are stuck indoors or out of inspiration is to take these little sketches from long ago and just paint them. And it might be tough to do this without photographic reference, because this is a very iconic place in the city. And everybody who looks at your painting is going to be like, but you did it the wrong color. So you might want to check before you do this kind of thing. Often when I'm field sketching, I will literally write down the colors I see in different parts of a drawing so that I don't get it wrong when I go back. And the pen and ink actually provides a lot of the information about what is dark and what is light. And the oil paint is pretty much just filling in, or the watercolor paint is filling in. Something that will make your drawings look richer is to both saturate the paint and change the color just a little bit. The changing the color is using something we call analogous colors, where you just move the color a little tiny bit one way or another. And that seems to work pretty well. Just to make things look more interesting. Anything else about that one? Anything to say about that one? Yeah. Here we go. What else can I add? Add this one in. Some of this. I'll put a reference to one of my favorite painters on the Google Classroom. He is a German illustrator, and he does this kind of thing like nobody else. He's just amazing at it. Maybe I'll make all the tires a little bit pink. The windscreen. This painting is going to have a lot of green and blue in it, so I'm looking for places that can be warm and dark. And then let's see. One thing that's neat is that perhaps you're already done, right? You don't have to paint everything in any drawing ever. You can also just leave bits blank. And once you know this, and once you've discovered this, you will start seeing that illustrators for big magazines and things often do stuff like that, where they just have put in a few spot colors, they've told the story, and then they've stopped. It's kind of like with good writing. You don't have to say more than you have to say. But I think this one I would probably just fill all the way in. It can be quite fun to sort of play around with different ways to put the paint on. So here's me living wildly, where I just take this big sponge brush, right? And it has a gradient in it because I dipped it in 2 different blues. Put more blue in. So I'm kind of doing a wet and wet wash on the fly. It's sort of fun. And if you want some shadows, it's kind of, when you have your paint wet, it's sort of a good moment to do that. So notice that when I draw, I use my paint pretty saturated. And if you've been in my classes, you know that I'm all about saturation and having the color be bright enough. So saturation is this idea that you use the paint straight up rather than dilute it. And that's not to say you shouldn't dilute it. It's just to say that you should be fairly careful to have your paint be strong enough that when the paint is dry, it's still vibrant. Because watercolor paint just drops away. So what I'm trying to do is mix up a pretty good green at this point. That can be the big tree that isn't painted in yet. And to do that, I think I really need something that's a little bit not pure green, but a sort of a muddy green. So I mixed in some pink. So I've done so many of these little sketches, and essentially what you see on my table is the kit I take with me when I travel. Some pens, some pencils, a watercolor kit, watercolor paper, and this is sort of my out and about, weighs less than a pound art kit, and pretty much does lots of fun things. It works really, really well. So the light in this painting is coming from above, so I'm leaving these spaces light in order to drop a better color into them. So I left them blank on purpose so that I can do this. And sort of show the shape of the trees. Let's see. It's funny, this watercolor paint is not what I am used to. But I'm happy to. I'm actually pretty pleased at how vibrant it can look. So it's quite nice, really. One of the most wonderful things about watercolor paint is if it's still wet, it comes right back off. So if you paint something too dark, you kind of just take it back off. And that works fine almost every time. So that's sort of how I would do that. I think the sky needs color as well, but I'm not sure I know what to make it. Maybe that. You know how San Francisco is all about just like the light hits the city and they interact. It's kind of fun. There's always fog or all these neat atmospheric effects up there. Look, there's a bleed coming out right there. And if you don't like that, the way to fix a bleed is to take a little bit of fresh, clean paper towel and blot it out. And you can fix it. You can also just not touch the wet paint with your paintbrush, but that's more a theory. Okay, then we're going to stop that one there. I'll finish it up and post it to the Google Classroom so you guys can see it later. But seriously, if you are traveling, if you're out at the beach or hiking, you can carry all these things with you and do a fairly nice full drawing pretty quickly. And if you only get the drawing done before the weather turns cold or you have to leave or whatever, you can put the paint in later just as a fun exercise. All right, let's see if I keep waiting for this to work. Let's see if we can add some ink to this now, if it's dry enough. Next time I'll have a dryer sitting here so I can just dab it. Oh, you know what I can do is instead of using I don't know why I didn't think of this, instead of using a pen just to demonstrate, I will use a black pencil. So we have something more like that. And then the idea is just to add over some of the lines and things that the picture needs. And you're going to be like, but wait, it's so sort of ugly because there's lots that got left out. So here's sort of a superpower of watercolor. And again, the more expensive the watercolor, the better this works, is you can actually use it as an opaque paint if you keep it sort of rich and dark and thick. So let's see about these ones. Remember, not everything needs a line all of the time. And I actually think drawings sort of, especially this kind of drawing where you're adding on top, that it can be really nice to leave stuff that isn't sort of line defined. And just like with last week, we talked about light and dark lines and heavy and thick lines. So you can actually show a little bit of shading just by making the lines on the bottoms of each flower a little bit darker, like that. It's kind of a shorthand for dark and light. So it can be a shorthand for things in front and things behind. It can also be a shorthand for where's the light coming from. Okay, and then these leaves, let's see. They're working much better than my pens. This leaf. And there's one here too. So see how the lines really define the drawing in a way that without them, the drawing doesn't look very fun. And I thought I'd show you guys something else I have. And if you don't have white gouache, you can use whiteout. And this is actually kind of fun. You could just use whiteout on a painting, and it's literally white gouache. So if there are places you want to change it a little bit, edit it, whatever, you can do that. It's just whiteout. And this, you know, all these little things, you can either scan your picture and put it in Photoshop, or you can just do this. And, you know, I'm sure other people would say that this is ridiculous and against all the rules, but I am not somebody who thinks there are rules. The whiteout is sort of a blunt instrument, and it's not even that I mind that it's whiteout and not gouache. It's more that I really, really want to do this with a brush. So with a brush, I just have better control, so I want to do it with a brush. My brush is dirty. Let's see. Here we go. So here's what I do. I've started doing this a lot, and I think it's a little bit silly, but I sort of enjoy it. So there you have it. That is how you do it. Oh my gosh, it's really dirty. Maybe I'll just get a change. So I keep doing this, and I don't know, maybe I should stop, but I do enjoy it. And I think it does help make the paint just better. Often if I want to really blot out something that's really ugly, I have to use a fair bit of whiteout, and then it sort of becomes an oil painting anyway. So anyway, it's just a thought. If you have gouache or like gouache, I love gouache, and there are lots of people online who are using gouache who used to be oil painters, and they're having so much fun. Um, I can put some names in my Google Classroom as well for those peeps, because I really like what they're doing, and they're having a good time. And if you're traveling, gouache is sort of your ideal, because you can do it anywhere and it's not very big. Yeah, when I take my oil paint kit out, my oil paint kit is in a giant backpack and weighs about 30 or 40 pounds. So gouache and sketching and all that is very fun to do. Sometimes I actually use, see if I can find it, I'll use a different color of pen on top of these drawings, but I don't think I have a good one within hand. Like this is a marking pen. It's like a Crayola kid's pen. But see how much more vibrant the ink is than the original watercolor, so you can do that kind of thing. Bye, Selma. Let's see. What else can I show you? And then we didn't really get to this one, but I gotta say, I really like it the way it is, but it's also possible to do the same sort of ink on top treatment to it. Let's see. Here are some of the things I would do is just give it a little bit more definition. And as always, it's possible that less is more and you don't really want to add all that much stuff to it. It's possible that a few small lines is just enough to kind of bring it into focus. I really like it the way it is, but I also feel like it's not quite there. So I might fiddle with that one as well and post it to my Google account, my Google Classroom. All right, anybody have any questions? Because it is 2. Fanny, do you want to pipe up?
Doesn't look like we have any questions. Thank you.
Okay.
That was beautiful to watch.
It's probably fairly peaceful to watch. So I hope that you will post your drawings and things to my classroom. You can also post them. We made a couple art tags. BAAC at home. And if you tag that on Instagram or Facebook, I can have a look at what you did.
And we have a great question from Lisa.
Yeah.
She's painting white flowers, calla lilies. How does she do that?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. I'll do a small calla lily.
Great question, Lisa.
Here we go. See if I can like remember what a calla lily looks like. Right? And then they have these sort of big spatulate leaves like that, I think. Okay, little calla lily sketch right off the top of my head. Here is a very good answer for you. The calla lily is white. So let me bring this into view. Calla lily is white. You're like, what do I do? Oh, that's really nice. So I mixed this blue and this green, or this green and this blue together. So to draw something white, all you have to do is draw something behind it. And you can just define how big your picture is. Yeah. And then if you want to add more, kind of give it more pop, there's the beautiful little stem in the middle. I would actually be careful to make it like really bright. Like that. And then the green stem here, make that really dark. And then this whole area has the opportunity to just be a big green wash. like that. How's that?
It's good. It's great.
Yeah.
You could also put some shading
Yeah.
around the.
Yeah, I actually think you're right. The sort of the underneath of the calla lily. Trying to think of a good color, but something pretty subtle. Like that to make the upper surface pop. How's that?
Beautiful.
Yeah, seems fine. Wow, spontaneous calla lily. Any other good questions? Let's see. All right. That's kind of a neat little set of sketches on one page. It's very random, but there's something kind of nice about it.
I like it when things like that happen in a sketchbook.
Yeah, and they're just sort of pasted on top of each other, and that's fine. You can actually cut them all out and collage them, which is something I often do with that kind of thing. All right. So, oh, hi, Sunny. So I went to school with Sunny's children. Any other questions? So you can post all your drawings at Palo Alto Art Center at home, and you can join my Google Classroom to see lots of references that I referred to while I'm talking and drawing. So I need to remember what I said I would post, so I'll actually do it. German watercolorist. Anything else out there that you wanted to hear more about? Maybe I'll see if I can find some samples of paintings of white flowers, which is going to be probably my friend Carolyn Lord, lives over in the East Bay, the fabulous watercolorist. Let's see, I can't remember what else I said, but I'll try and think of it. All right, we should be able to get together again next week. And I think on my syllabus, I said we would talk about doing nature stories from both life and sort of supplementing with other images. Is that still of interest to people? Or do you want me to just do another sort of basic how to color and how to color mix class? So let's see, story or color mixing. You can just respond in the text. Or you can send me comments inside the Google Classroom a few days before.
Everyone wants stories.
Oh, everyone wants story, yay. Yay for stories. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Come with a few stories in mind, and we will see what we can come up with. If you look at my Google Classroom, I just thumbed through an old sketchbook and found that I often do stories in my sketchbooks, so there are a few samples in there of things that I saw when I was out walking around. All right.
Thank you, Anne.
You are welcome. I'm sorry today's class felt a little slower to me. I didn't expect it to kind of be a little less fast. So next week I'll try to crank up the speed on the content.
I don't think it could be helped given the content.
Yeah.
I mean, you were creating paintings before our very eyes.
Okay. Well, my first question for any class I take is this content rich? So I'm trying to make these very content rich. And they may feel like they go a little too fast, but they're also offering a lot of information in a short amount of time. So, which is kind of my goal. All right.
Well done. All right.
Hey.
Thanks
Post me what you've done, and I would love to see it. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. And I'll see you next week, Monday at 1.